We'll go ahead and be turning to Matthew chapter 20. Matthew chapter 20. That's where we're going to be in our study here tonight. Chapter 21 is out on the back table if you want to pick that up. For the next study, again, we'll be out of town, so it'll be a little bit till we resume. But chapter 21 is on the back table. You can go ahead and pick that up. Also on the back table, next to chapter 21, you'll see a chart entitled The Last Week of the Life of Christ, what is often in religious circles referred to as Passion Week, that week leading up to the crucifixion. There's a chart of that last week of the life of Christ, the events of those days as they unfold, what happens each day. It's actually a week and a day. It's Sunday to Sunday, from the triumphal entry to Resurrection Sunday. But all of those are depicted that week on that chart if you want to pick that up. So you can have a copy of that chart for when we get there, because the start of 21 is the triumphal entry, meaning our next chapter, we're starting that last week of the life of Christ. And we're in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 21 again, or chapter 20 again. The Gospel of Matthew is about Jesus being the Messiah of Old Testament prophecy. We've got the prelude to Jesus' ministry in 1:1 to 4:16. The ministry in Galilee in 4:17 to 16:20, and Jesus in Jerusalem 16:21 through 28:20. We've been using this chart on the chronology of the life of Christ. We're in the period known as the close of ministry. Spans Matthew 19 through chapter 20. We're bringing that section to a close here in our study tonight as we do chapter 20. So our next study, 21, begins this period of the last week, as we said, of the life of Christ. And again, that's what that chart on the back is, breaking down that last week of the life of Christ. We're going to go through this quickly. Again, we have not been able to go through it as much lately as we're trying to finish up the book of Matthew, but our chapter content. Chapter 1 is the genealogy and birth of the Messiah. 2, the Messiah as a child. 3 is the forerunner of the Messiah. 4 is the Messiah's temptation and early ministry. What's chapters 5, 6, and 7 about? The Sermon on the Mount. Chapter 8, he performs miracles. Chapter 9, then, he performs more miracles. Chapter 10 is the calling of the 12 apostles and the limited commission. 11 is the messengers from John to the Messiah. 12 is the Pharisees find fault with the Messiah. 13, the Messiah tells many parables. 14, he performs miracles and John is beheaded. 15 is the Messiah on unwashed hands and more miracles. Chapter 16 is Peter acknowledging Jesus is the Messiah. 17 is the Messiah at the Mount of Transfiguration. 18, the Messiah on relationships. And 19 is the Messiah on divorce and remarriage. We're ready for chapter 20. The Messiah tells parable of the laborers in the vineyard. There's more in that chapter than just that specific parable, but that is a good part of this chapter. There's 34 verses. The first 16 are that parable. Question number 1. Briefly summarize the chapter. What is this chapter about?
Well, it's not about procrastination. I've heard people take the first part of this and say, well, you can wait and come the 11th hour. That's not what this passage is saying. And I know when we get to it, you look, it says there are others. They say, why didn't you come? And said, no one hires. Well, I believe that means they never heard the gospel call. Not that you can come later in life. That's not the point at all. But it does not mean to put it off till the 11th hour. Just wanted to say that.
You're right. That's a point there, and we'll talk about it. The reward is the same for those who come later, but that doesn't mean we procrastinate because we don't know that later is going to come. What is this chapter dealing with? 4 things.
The laborers in the vineyard.
Laborers in the vineyard is the first one. The second one, Jesus foretells his death and resurrection. The third is the mother of James and John's request to Jesus. The fourth is Jesus heals two blind men. What's the key verse of the chapter? Verses 27 and 28. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Question number 3, summarize the parable of the vineyard. Laborers in the vineyard. What's going on in this parable? Just a summary of the content. We'll talk about what it means in a minute. What's the summary of the contents? There are laborers who came early, those who came in middle, and those who came very last, and they were all paid the same. We'll talk about what that means here in just a moment. Point number one, then, the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. Beginning at verse 1, it says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. Now, when he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And he went out about the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and said to them, 'You also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right I will give you.' So they went. Again, he went out about the 6th and the 9th hour, and did likewise. And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing idle, and said to them, 'Why have you been standing here idle all day?' They said to him, 'Because no one hired us.' He said to them, 'You must go into the vineyard, and whatever is right you will receive.' So when evening had come, the owner of the vineyard said to his steward, 'Call the laborers and give them their wages, beginning with the first to the last.' And when those came who hired about the 11th hour, they received a denarius. When the first came, they supposed they would receive more, and they likewise received a denarius. And when they had received it, they complained against the landowner, saying, 'These last men have worked only 1 hour, and you made them equal to us who have borne the burden and the heat of the day.' But he answered one of them and said, 'Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go your way. I wish to give to this last man the same as to you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own things? Or is it your eye evil because I am good? So the last will be first and the first last, for many are called, but few are chosen.'" So as we get into the parable of the laborers in the vineyard, we've got those that are called the third hour, and verse number, or hired in the morning. Keep in mind, the way the Jews would often count time is from about 6 to 6. So when they're hired at that early, they're hired in the morning about 6 o'clock. So when he goes about the third hour, he hires them about 9 o'clock, noon, 3, and the 11th hour would be about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, just the way the Jews sort of counted time. Sun up to sundown, if you will, that time they could work, where they could work in the vineyard. Remember the point, we even sing a song about working for the night is coming. They would work in that time frame. So he goes out and he hires some in the morning, and when he hires them, he says, "I'm going to hire you for what? Denarius, which is a day's wage." He sent them into the vineyard. Then he goes the third hour and he sees others and he's standing idle. So he says to them, "You know what? You go and work in my vineyard too. I'm going to hire you too. I'll give you and whatever is right, I'll give you." What do they get? They'll get a denarius too. He goes out 3 hours later at the 6th hour. He goes out 3 hours after that at the 9th hour, and he sees what? Others still standing there. He hires them and says, he'll pay them what's right. What is he going to pay them? A denarius. He hires those at the 11th hour, and they were standing idle. He asked them why, and they said they were there because no one hired them. He says, "I'll hire you. I'll give you what's right." They only worked about an hour, but they got a denarius, or again, that day's wage. So he pays all of them. Those who were hired at the 11th hour received a denarius. So it almost seems like we're working backwards now, if you will. So he hired those from early in the morning to the evening. When he pays them, he starts with those who came last, because the ones that came early are come up supposing they're going to receive more because of what those coming at the 11th hour received. So those who come at the 11th hour, they received a denarius. Now keep in mind, let's go back to verse number 2. He agreed to hire the laborers in the morning for a denarius. So I'm going to give you. Now the statement used for the others is, "I'll give you what is right." That's what I'm going to give you. So when he starts with the last, they get a denarius. And so you can imagine as you work through, you're probably standing there, if you're the next guy, thinking, "I might get a little bit more," but you don't. You get a denarius. I only worked about 3 hours, okay. And the person that worked about 6 hours comes. The person that worked 9 hours. And the person that worked the full day, the 12 hours, comes. Why did I only get a denarius? And the point that the master made in verse 13 is, friend, am I doing you wrong? Did you not agree with me for what? Denarius. Do what? Yeah, a denarius, that day's wage. That's what I told you were going to get. You came and you worked, and so guess what you're going to get? You're going to get what you agreed to work for. Could you imagine just for a minute, just to put it in today's terms, that somebody gets hired at, I don't know exactly what minimum wage is here. It's different so many places. But let's say somebody's a worker for wages per hour, and they get hired at $15 an hour. And then somebody else comes along that's new, and they get hired at $16 an hour. And the first person hired at $15 thinks, well, you know what? If the new person got $16, surely I'm going to get $16, or maybe, hopefully even more. But they've never been given a raise. And the boss said, I'll hire you at $15, and they were hired at $15. So guess what they're going to get for their hourly rate until they're told otherwise? Going to get $15. It's what the boss said they were going to pay you. It's what they're going to get. It's what you agreed to work for. So take what's yours and go your way. I'll give to the last man the same as you. And the point in verse 15, is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own things? If I want, you agreed to work for, if you'd have come and agreed to work for 2 denarii, then it would have been unfair. But I hired you for a denarius. That's what I hired them for, and I can pay them what I choose. That's my right as the owner. The point is made. Or is your eye evil because I'm good? So the last will be first, the first last. Now I want to go back for a minute to chapter 19. I'm going to go back to verse 27 of chapter 19 for just a minute and tie these two together. Verse 27 beginning. All right, let's back up before verse 27. Let's back up to verse 23. Remember, verse 22, the rich young ruler we saw on Sunday went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Jesus said, assuredly I say to you that it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And again, I say to you, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Again, the point we made on Sunday, the point's not about, and some commentators have tried to make about this place called the eye of a needle that the camel could get on and they could get through, but it was difficult. No, I think he's using the term he's talking about an actual needle. You can't take a camel, a big animal, and put it through that little needle. Matthew uses the term for sewing needle. Luke, being a physician, uses the term for a physician's needle, both small needles. That's difficult. The disciples heard it. They questioned who could be saved, and he said, with men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. It's then that Peter made that statement we talked about Sunday morning in verse 27 that, see, we've left everything and followed you, therefore what shall we have? You know what? Look, we've left everything behind to follow you, so what are we going to get? Again, Peter wants to know what we're going to get. Again, I think Peter's reaction is, you don't have to worry about us, Lord, because we ain't got anything to keep us from you. So Jesus said, assuredly I say to you that in the regeneration, when the Son of Man sits on the throne of his glory, you who have followed me will sit on the 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or lands for my name's sake shall receive 100-fold and inherit eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and the last first. So how did chapter 19 end? Those that are first shall be last. Those that are last will be first. How does this parable end in chapter 16? Essentially the same way, when in verse 16 again he said in verse 16 that so the last will be first and the first last, for many are called but few are chosen. Verse 20 began with a very important 3-letter word. The word what? The very first word of chapter 20 is the word for. He ended with the first will be last, the last will be first. For, so you know what this is? Further explanation about who can be saved, going back to what we saw in chapter 19. The first will be last and the last will be first. Yes?
After we have done all we're commanded to do, we should say we are unprofitable servants. And this person, like practically applying today, maybe somebody obeyed the gospel in their teens perhaps and lived faithfully. Well, then somebody hears the gospel But I think that's crucial that somebody that heard later in life, and they're going to get eternal life. If I'm not happy about that, I better do some soul searching. So if I resent them for hearing the gospel and obey it late life, then I'm not right before God. And also, if I have resentment to the Creator of everything for granting this eternal life, then I better reconsider my heart's position in that matter also. Both things.
You're right. And as you talked about, and I think it's important to bring back to attention, as you mentioned this earlier, it's not about procrastination. We can't procrastinate. We've talked about that a number of times, the urgency. The Bible talks about the urgency. It would have been over a year ago, but I was just in a meeting preached a lesson I did here last year in a different speaker meeting last week on three things that cannot wait. There are certain things we can drag our feet on, but there's some things that can't. And one of those is we can't drag our feet on obeying the gospel. But there are some who either have never heard or some who heard, spurned the Lord's invitation, but then eventually had their hearts touched to obey the gospel that may not have obeyed earlier. And if you ask them, by the way, they'll often make the statement of, I wish that what? I'd obeyed earlier. My dad has said he's been there in his 30 some years of preaching, a little over 30 years of preaching, how many times he's been there when somebody passes away, and the answer and what they say often is, I wish I could have given more of my life in service to God. He said, I've yet to have anybody tell me I wish I had given less. I wish I had waited. And there's a number of reasons we don't need to wait. We don't know what tomorrow holds, and our hearts could become hardened. But the point here is, regardless of when the labor is hired, if somebody truly obeys, whether they obey the gospel when they first realize as a young person that they're lost and they realize what they need to do to be saved, whether they first hear later in life or when they're middle-aged, or whether they've heard and rejected, but later on their heart is touched and their heart is softened again and they obey, regardless of which one of those one is, if they sincerely obey, the reward is heaven, whether you serve God faithfully for 80 years or 80 minutes before your life on earth ended, that at the end, the reward, if you serve God sincerely, is the same. Yes.
A person that did obey young, even if they live to be a ripe old age, they should look back in retrospect and say, it was a blessing to obey at a young age and enjoy the spiritual blessings that are only had in Christ Jesus. Other people can't have it. So if we're looking back and say, well, I wish I'd have come the 11th hour, and then I could eat, drink, and be married, live however I wanted. That's the wrong attitude also.
You're right. And as I say, as we look back, and the point of this is about those who sincerely come, which regardless of what labor they are, I've known people that obeyed the gospel at a really young age. I've known people that were older. They were near the end of their life when they either first heard the gospel or the first time they really seriously considered the gospel message. And I've known people that when they heard the gospel, they were very near the end of their life. They may have never been able to physically dart the door of a church building, but if they're sincere in that, then they get to go to be with the Lord forever, regardless of how long they served Him, as long as they were faithful to Him. Let's go to verse 17 now. I'm going to set up some context for us here for where we are in verse 17. Because remember, going back to chapter 16 marked a transition. Remember in chapter 16, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago on Wednesday night in Matthew chapter 16, that Jesus said to Peter that you are Simon, or blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who's in heaven, and I say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell, or better translated, the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. And we said there that that's likely a reference to the fact that even though it looks dark for God's plan when Christ dies, that the gates of Hades are not going to prevail against it. Hades, the Hadean realm, death. Verse 21 then says, from that time Jesus began to show His disciples that He must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and raised the third day. So then He foretells His death there. That's where Peter says, Lord, you're not going to die. We go into chapter 17, 22 to 23. While they were staying in Galilee, Jesus said, the Son of Man is about to be betrayed. In verse 20, verse 22. So he's been warning them, talking about the fact that he is going to be put to death. He warned them in chapter 16. He warned them again in 17. Now here in chapter 20. Now Jesus, going up to Jerusalem, took the 12 disciples aside on the road and said to them, Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge and to crucify, and the third day he will rise again. So Jesus has been reminding them, I'm going to Jerusalem and I'm going to be what? Crucified, but on the third day I'm going to be raised. This is the third time it's mentioned he warned them of it. He mentioned it a number of times on his way to Jerusalem. Again, Luke's account, the journey to Jerusalem begins at the end of 9 and goes through, I think it's 19. I'd have to go back and look. So it's a longer discussion there where he starts foretelling that. But Jesus is telling them all along the way that he is going there and will be put to death.
Yes, Luke 9:51 says Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. I think that captures your thought very well because he was resolute in this. He was unwavering in his determination. The Hebrew writer said, though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the thing that he suffered and being made perfect. He became the author of eternal salvation to all that obey him. So he was resolute in this. He set his face toward it. No one was waiting there. That would have taken a lot of determination to know in advance you're going to do this.
You're right. I mentioned a moment ago too, starting that section we call the close of ministry. That close of ministry is really that journey to Jerusalem. Luke's account, that stretches from chapter 10, verse 1 through chapter 19 as that journey. It gives us more detail about what happens on that journey as he set his face toward Jerusalem. So again, that section that we have in 2 chapters in Matthew's covering 9 to 19 there.
In Acts 9, when, I believe it's Acts chapter 9, it said, I'm going to show Paul these things he must suffer for the cause of Christ. And then you go into 2 Corinthians chapter 11, we see some of the things, not all, but some that he suffered. And you just think, man can do this too. And all the desire to live with God in Christ Jesus is going to suffer persecution. My point is, this isn't beyond the scope of even what man not only can do, but actually needs to do. Because we may think, well, this type of determination was unique to Jesus. It was not.
You're right. And I think we're going to see here in a minute, there's even some sort of forewarning about some things that are going to happen with some of the disciples. Forewarned to us here a little bit later on in the chapter. Let's go to verse 20 now. Our question 4, what's the mother of James and John's request? That one sit at his right, the other on his left. Number 2, question 5, what's Jesus' reply? Yeah. So he talks about her request there in this chapter. Talks about it's not mine to give, and then he asks them a question in return. We'll get to that here in just a moment. Beginning at verse 20, it says, this is the mother's request. There's her request and Jesus' response. 20 and 21, the request. 22 to 28, her response. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons, so that's James and John, came to him with her sons, kneeling down and asking something from him. And he said to her, what do you wish? And she said, grant that these 2 sons of mine sit, one on your right hand, and the other on your left in your kingdom. But Jesus answered and said, you do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink and be baptized with the baptism I will be baptized with? They said, we are able. And he said to them, you'll indeed drink my cup and be baptized with the baptism that I'm baptized with, but to sit at my right hand and my left is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it is prepared by my Father. And when the 10 heard it, they were greatly displeased with the 2 brothers. But Jesus called them to himself and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you, but whomever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. So as we go back here to verse 20, she says, grant that they sit one on your right and one on your left. She's got the same misunderstanding the apostles do for much of this, and including later on in Acts, even after Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, that the mother of James and John is thinking of what? An earthly kingdom. That there's literally going to be a throne here on your right hand. There's going to be a throne on your left hand. Who's going to sit on either side of you? Meaning they have some of the most prestigious places. Now keep in mind, this has already been a debate back in chapter 18 by the disciples. They've already been debating about who will be the greatest. It's a debate that takes place a few times with the disciples. They're debating it there. And so she says, grant them to sit on your right and left. And he says, you don't know what you're asked. Are you able to drink the cup that I'm about to drink and be baptized with the baptism I'm to be baptized with? And this is the point I think Jesus is making. Jesus is going to go and do what? He just told them, be crucified. I'm going to suffer. You want to be with me? You want to be next to me? Are you going to be able to suffer with me? Not necessarily suffering there next to him on the cross, but if you want to be with me, you're going to have to suffer. By the way, James later on is what? Beheaded. Yeah, killed with the sword. John, we saw in Revelation, is banished to Patmos. As far as we are aware, by the way, John is the only one of the apostles to, at least from history and what we know from the biblical story, John's the only one to die really of natural causes. But even he suffered greatly being banished and things for the sake of the gospel. So they say they can, and he says, okay, then if you can, guess what? They say we're able, and he says, you will. You drink. You will indeed drink in my cup and be baptized. But the positions you're asking for, they're not mine. It's granted to the Father. And when the other disciples heard it, they're now displeased with the two brothers. I almost imagine, if you can, backing up to chapter 18, they've had this discussion on who's the greatest. They don't want to tell Jesus about it in chapter 18. Jesus sort of draws it out of them. Now, he already knew what they said, but he gets them, he draws it out of them, talks to them about it in chapter 18. Now we turn around and it's almost like, listen, we already had this discussion once, and now you had to get your mama involved to come and try to ask for you to have the positions of authority, and it really agitated the other apostles, and that's when Jesus told them, you decide to be great, you need to be like a servant. And he uses himself as the illustration, a point that I think is the key message of the Gospel of Mark, which is that Jesus came not to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. The parallel to this is Mark chapter 10, 32 to 34. I think Mark 10, 34, by the way, just as a side note for you, is one of the key points, or that section there, and into verse 45 even, or verse 45 rather, 35 to 45 is Mark's account. Verse 45 is the key verse to the book of Mark, making the same message, which is that Jesus came not to be served, but to serve. Yes.
This shows a lot about human nature. It can be prevalent today. Hopefully it's not, but it could be among us. But I think this brings to my mind when Paul wrote about the abuse of the spiritual gifts at the church of Corinth, how they wanted to think that their spiritual gift was superior to somebody else. And it kind of comes from the same thread of logic in my mind.
You're right. It comes from the idea that...
I guess to some extent it's almost human nature that man wants to try to get as high as he can and climb the ladder, whether it's in business or politics or whatever. Somebody becomes a politician, and they may start out as a small town mayor, but they might decide they want to have their eyes set on the White House. Now, it's a long way from a small town mayor to the White House, but they've got ambitions. They want to climb to the top. The janitor at the bank would like to eventually be the CEO. Probably not the easiest path to be the CEO from janitor, but the point is, man likes to try to climb to the top, and they want to put themselves in positions of power and prestige. Skip those questions and go to this section. Jesus heals two blind men. I'm going to read the story, and then I'm going to go back and answer something real quick about this story at the very end before we run out of time. Now as they went, verse 29 beginning, they went out of Jericho, a great multitude followed. And behold, two blind men sitting by the road, when they heard that Jesus was passing by, cried out, saying, Have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David. Then the multitude warned them that they should be quiet, but they cried out all the more, saying, Have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David. So Jesus stood still and called them and said, What do you want me to do for you? They said to them, Lord, that our eyes may be opened. So Jesus had compassion, touched their eyes, and immediately their eyes received sight, and they followed him. So what's taking place here? I'll go back to the questions now. What's the request to the blind men? Open our eyes. And what's Jesus' reply? His first reply when they first cried out to him, O Lord, have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David. His first thing is, what do you want? Then they told him what they want, and he had compassion. He touched their eyes, and immediately their eyes received sight. Jesus heals two blind men, showing us again the power that he has. Here's what I want to go back on real quick. Let me go back to this right here. The parallel to this is Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10. And I want you to go over there for a minute and keep your marker here in Matthew. How many blind men does Jesus heal? 2. Mark's parallel account, beginning at verse 46, says, As they came to Jericho, so we're in the same setting, they're leaving Jericho. He went over out of Jericho, and his disciples and a great multitude. Blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the road begging, and when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. So, seemingly, the view that some will have is that we have a contradiction. It's not. I'm going to go back to the same thing about the demon-possessed men we dealt with earlier. That one account says there's two demon-possessed men. Other accounts deal with a conversation between Jesus and one. We pointed this out then, I'll point it out again. How many demon-possessed men were there? 2. Matthew's account is giving us the picture of the whole miracle. There were 2. But it seems, if you will, that the ringleader, I guess, of these two men is Bartimaeus. The one that Jesus seems to have the most conversing with. So Mark's account zooms in on the one. Just like some of the accounts do on the healing of the demon-possessed men when the demons cast out. I think it's into the swine is the story. Where there's 2 in one setting and 1 in another. It's not a contradiction. Matthew's giving us the broad picture. There's 2 men. Mark's account is zooming in on the man it seems the most conversing took place with, which is Bartimaeus. Luke chapter 18 records a parallel as well. It just says there's a certain man that sat by the road begging. It talks about one man, doesn't give his name, focused on Bartimaeus as well. Yes?
They say these weren't very loving people who were surrounded by them. If you were loving people and you knew this was the one opportunity, I doubt they had very much ability to heal blindness back then. But you'd have thought they would have helped him get up to Jesus. If you was in the situation, you want to do another what you have done to you, wouldn't you help assist those people for this healing process? But they're trying to suppress them, tell them to be quiet. What are you very good people in there?
Now, you're right. They didn't seem to care very much for these blind men as they were focused more on getting them quiet. Again, we're done with this. Chapter 21. It'll be a little bit till we resume, but chapter 21 and that chart on the last week of Life for Christ are on the back table. You can pick those up.